Welcome to the Never Too Early Fantasy Football Podcast, where it is never too early for fantasy football. My name is Jeff.
And I'm Alex.
Hey, Alex, how's it going today?
It's going well. We're getting close to fantasy draft season.
Single digits weeks away until the NFL regular season kickoff. 9 weeks from when we're recording this. So, as always, thank you for downloading, listening, liking, and commenting on our podcast videos. Please subscribe to us on the socials. We are on Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, and now we're on Threads also with the handle at N2EFantasy. Alex, what do we have on today's podcast?
We have news around the league. This is our news episode, and we've got several wide receivers and running backs to talk about. We've got all kinds of suspension issues that could potentially come up, holdouts. We've got more gambling probes. We have a Netflix docuseries, and we have again the Hard Knocks to solidify, as well as an update on the Commanders' sale. We have new news anchors that are going to be hired that are former players as well, and we have people commenting on a lot of drama out here over the past couple of weeks. So why don't we just dig into it? And Jeff, I know this is one of your favorite players that you like to talk about. Devontae Parker signed a 3-year contract extension with the New England Patriots. It sounds like quite a doozy of a contract. Why don't you break that down for us?
He signed a 3-year extension worth up to $33 million. Now, as the details have leaked out about the contract, it appears to be heavily incentive laden, and we will see what happens with that contract. But that was essentially the exact same contract that they gave Juju Smith-Schuster, but I do believe Juju has slightly less incentives in his contract. What do you think about this Parker signing? He's 30 years old currently.
He's one of those guys. He's had a season or two of success, and one of these guys that we thought might end up being like a wide receiver 2, maybe borderline wide receiver 1 at one point. He hasn't worked out that way the past few years. I know New England has been hurting for the wide receiver position, but it seems like they still have some faith in him, but they want him to prove it based off of all the incentives that they gave him. So it's a really a make or break contract for him to try to break out.
Right, and I assume it's his last contract too, because he's going to be 34 by the end of this contract. So I don't see him signing another deal past this. Like, this is going to be the one that takes him to the end of his career.
I mean, we'll see whether that offense can turn around with actually hiring an offensive coordinator in Bill O'Brien. If Mac Jones can turn it around from last season's debacle and kind of bring back his rookie year vibes and kind of build off of that. Juju and Parker bigger targets, and they also have Gesicki, so maybe there's hope for this offense, but it's not a move that kind of moves the needle for most fans.
Right, at least they have an offensive coordinator now.
Yep, that's right. And speaking of Bill O'Brien, one of his former wide receivers, DeAndre Hopkins, said that he will retire when he's no longer a 1,000-yard wide receiver. And New England is one of the teams that has been trying to sign him, but the Titans look like they're currently the leader in the clubhouse for him. Jeff, I know you have some news on the betting odds for DeAndre Hopkins, and what do you think the likelihood is for him signing somewhere?
So in the last 24 hours, the betting odds have went from plus 500 to negative 300 for the Titans to sign DeAndre Hopkins. Hopkins also came out this week saying that he will retire when he's no longer a 1,000-yard receiver, in that he could play till his late 30s. So it's kind of funny. We were just talking about Parker and this is probably his last contract. It does not look like Hopkins is looking for this to be his last contract, because I don't expect him to get more than like a 2 or 3 year deal max. So he is looking to play longer than this. The Titans currently have room for him in the offense, so they do make the most sense out of the teams that have currently bid on him. But have you heard of any other teams that are interested in Hopkins?
Right now, the two front leaders are the Titans and New England because they're the only ones that have formally offered him a contract. But the Bills are still interested at the right price. So it's not likely he'll go to the Bills if they're not willing to meet his contract demands. The Chiefs are rumored to potentially make a contract offer once they finalize an extension for their defensive tackle, Chris Jones, which should free up cap this year. So the Chiefs are still in the running for him, and I know a lot of people still think Detroit is an option as well, although that looks increasingly less likely because we haven't heard any interest on Hopkins' side for them. So it's really those five teams at this moment. But I really think it'd be a waste of time if you went to the Titans for everybody.
Come on, you got Hopkins, Burks, Henry, Tannehill's got a second year tight end. Let's go.
I don't know if Tannehill is breaking the 4,000 mark with the Titans. I think he typically maxes out at 3,700, 3,800. It's a very conservative offense. So I don't know if that's the right move for him numbers wise or fantasy wise. I just know it would make your projections pretty easy because you can just slot him in and some of those missing targets.
So I have Tennessee passing for 3591 this year. And of that, there's still 932 yards pending. So Tannehill could still throw for 3,600 yards, and Hopkins could get 1,000 yards receiving. Like it's not like one or the other or anything like that. They just have a gaping hole in that wide receiver, that pass catcher one role, because I'm not sure Burks is ready to take that leap in year two. And if he is, he still needs someone to take the pressure off of him and be on the opposite side. And they definitely don't have that right now. So that's kind of where we're at with
But if he
that.
only gets 930 something yards, that's not 1,000 yards. He'd retire, right?
Yep. Bye. Good career.
I don't think that that's the spot he ends up with. But if they're the only ones that are offering and they're offering at with more money than other teams, he might have to take that deal, even if it's a short-term one. But we would be remiss if we didn't talk about the other superstar free agent out there. Dalvin Cook is still unsigned and still mulling offers. Apparently, Miami sent him an offer, but he doesn't like it, so it must be lower than he values himself at. So he has rejected that offer and he's not going to sign unless they bump up the money or another team swoops in. So do you think Miami will offer more money? Do you think he'll eventually cave in on his demands, or do you think someone else swoops in and gets Dalvin Cook?
Delvin is an interesting case. And the only reason I say that is because he's getting paid to sit at home by Minnesota this year. And basically, if a team doesn't come in and beat that by a pretty significant amount, there's almost no incentive for Cook to say that I'm going to go play for free or $1 million or $2 million, anything like that. So he's an interesting case that he might sit out the entire year out of principle because he's getting paid. And as a running back, you probably should save those hits if you're not playing for a decent amount of money. And Cook is 27. He'll be 28 before the season starts. And that's typically the cliff of a running back, anyways. So I'm not sure how many teams would offer him that much above what Minnesota is paying him this year.
I think most teams would be willing to go about maybe 8 million right now, which is more than what Minnesota's paying him. But I don't know if that's enough for him because it's not even what people are getting on the franchise tag. But it's looking like he's gonna sit and wait until the right opportunity comes around. So maybe into camp.
Absolutely. So, I mean, it's going to be interesting with what happens here. And as I said, he's going to be 28 next month. And our team's going to want to pay that 8 million for a running back that could be hitting end of life for his career. So it'll be an interesting situation. There's not a ton of teams with a ton of gaps at running back right now. So he might just have to wait out for an injury. We'll see where that goes.
Well, speaking of a top running back like Dalvin Cook, and speaking of the franchise tag, we have two running backs really, Josh Jacobs and Saquon Barkley, that both have come out and basically said that if they don't have a deal done by the deadline on Monday, the 17th, that they will not report to camp. So, what does this mean for these teams, and how serious do you think these running backs are?
So I think Josh Jacobs' situation is pretty dire. And I have thought this all along because he doesn't have a ton of incentive to play for a bad Raiders team. Assuming that he gets a ton of carries, he's going to get pummeled in that offense. And that just increases his chance of injury, taking some tread off of his tires. I do think that Jacobs and Barkley will play part of the season because I don't see them foregoing a whole season for their benefits and to accrue a whole season, and also not to have the franchise tag roll over to next year. But I do see Jacobs in a more dire situation than Barkley because I do think that the Giants need Barkley to be able to compete for a playoff spot this year. And I don't believe that the Raiders are going to be in a spot for playoff contention this year. And I think that's a big difference.
Yeah, I would agree because Barkley, at least with the Giants are a borderline playoff team and potentially more than that if they can take the next step forward. But like what you said with Jacobs, the Raiders aren't likely to make the playoffs in a crowded AFC, especially an AFC West that's so tough. So they're both their team's major offensive weapon. They both have leverage in that regard. But Jacobs has no incentive to put tread on the tires, even if he cost himself several millions of dollars this season. It definitely benefits them to use their leverage. Whether or not someone caves, whether it's the team or whether it's the running back, by Monday, I don't know, and that's something that we have to keep an eye on Monday and then into week one.
Yeah, and I've said in offline here that I could see Barkley easily signing a 4-year, $60 million deal with at least the first 2 years guaranteed. And compared to what Daniel Jones got at 160, 60 for Barkley for 4 years seems like a bargain at that point.
Yeah. All right. So now we have several different disciplinary news to talk about. So we can talk about the first one here, Hassan Haskins, who was considered the key handcuff last year going into the season for Henry, has now been arrested for a domestic violence charge. How do you think that affects his outlook this year? And does he fall behind the newly drafted running back TJ Sharp? Is he now like third, fourth on the roster? Is he going to get cut? What do you think for Hassan Haskins?
I mean, this one was pretty serious. It was him and his girlfriend getting arrested. So, depending on the facts and what criminal complaints come against him, this really could end his career because he wasn't that impressive last year. They drafted a new guy to back up Henry this year. So, in all reality, he could be cut this year. He could be put on the commissioner's exempt list and not paid. There's a lot of scenarios out of this, but none of it good for his career. This probably ends Haskins' career and any chance that he's ever a starting running back in the league.
Yeah, it's not good, and especially since he didn't quite show what his talent level should have shown last year. This added on top of that, it's likely that it at least is suspended and moved down on the roster or potentially cut, and it could end his career, like you said.
Absolutely.
All right, next is another one of your favorite players, Alvin Kamara, pleads no contest to lower his potential charge, criminal and civil case that he settled as well. So he's trying to diminish potential suspension as well as the legal liabilities that he has. Do you think that him pleading no contest? Do you think that a suspension's coming? How severe do you think that possible suspension would be? What do you think the outlook is for Kamara following this?
I think this is going to be a really interesting case because this will be the second case that's determined by the new disciplinary process. Last year was Watson, where he got 6 games, and the NFL appealed and they gave him 10 games. I think it'll have to go before their appointed judge or whatever you want to call arbitrator, anything like that. And then both sides will have a chance to appeal after that. So the one thing that's interesting about the Kamara case is there is video out there of it, but it's male on male violence, and the NFL really hasn't had a situation of male on male violence that doesn't involve a weapon or anything like that. So this is going to be the first case of its type. And I do think that anywhere between 0 and 6 games are likely, and anywhere to fall in there is anyone's guess. But the NFL doesn't seem to be in too much of a rush to get this process rolling with Kamara. I know this time last year, they were really pushing through and pumping through the Deshaun Watson case because that actually made the league look bad. And I don't really know if this case makes the league look bad, even though it's a crime and everything like that. I just don't know if it brings a negative light to the shield.
Well, like you pointed out, the league is very image conscious and it certainly doesn't make it look good. So I agree, 0 to 6 is probably the range. I know I'm personally leaning on the higher side. I think it's probably going to be 6. I think you in the past, or at least offline, have said you think probably 2-ish. around there. So we'll see which one's right, but I don't think video evidence, even if we're not clear exactly how much the extent Alvin personally was involved versus just his entourage. It's on camera. Someone was beat down, and it was involving either Alvin directly or his crew or both. Either way, it puts a negative cast to Alvin Kamara and by effect the NFL. And there's a lot of fan sentiment that some of these guys are thugs. So I think that the league will probably come down hard. Whether that's fair or not, I don't think that that really comes into play. I think the NFL just does what it thinks it wants to do, and I think it's probably going to be pretty heavy-handed when it comes to this.
Yeah, we cannot hold Kamara accountable for his posse or his entourage and whatever they do in that situation.
But
So
it's still unclear if the other person involved, like what did they do in that situation? We don't know if
I
that
do think
person
that matters.
escalated things. Yeah. So those are things that haven't really fully come to light, and maybe we'll see more as it comes out. But either way, I think a suspension's coming.
Absolutely. I mean, I like your philosophy on it with the 6 games because that helps you with your rankings and just preparing for the worst case scenario. And if you're preparing for the worst case scenario, then that means you're probably going to get a better value for Kamara, especially if it's less games than you thought to begin with. But it's really hard to rank him and project him right now because we don't know how many games he's going to be available for, and that's a big chunk in ranking and projections is knowing how many games that someone could potentially be available for.
Well, the bad news keeps coming. We have the official gambling probe has been completed as of yet. So there's no more that are coming out. And it really hasn't been that bad of an impact for fantasy owners. It's really only been Williams that has been the big suspension for that 6 games. Everyone else is it's not really going to impact your fantasy. So hopefully with the little symposium that they did on gambling and they've clarified all the different things that they count as gambling that's prohibited, hopefully it's clearer for the players and now they know to just not bet any money at all while they're playing in the NFL. So maybe no more are coming, and let's hope that that's it. But Jeff, what do you think about that situation?
I think that you said there was bad news, but I think there's some good news out of this. There were no fantasy relevant players that came out of this latest one, and I'm really hoping that this is it for because I think the NFL was crystal clear this time on what the expectations are. So now, if someone does not follow the expectations, one, they probably have a problem that they probably need to address, and number two, I don't think they have any leg to stand on when it comes to discipline if you're going to get caught now. Like, I think Ridley should have been it, but Ridley was a one off, and now we got like a slew of them this offseason. So I'm hoping this is the last we hear of it because honestly, I don't want to lose a fantasy player because they decided to bet on games. And obviously, that affects our ability to bet on games. So that's like a little bit
Yep.
of irony there. But yeah, so let's hope that this is the last we hear of it and that they play by the rules going forward.
Jeff, this one is for you. The NFL has blamed players who have complained about the Super Bowl field playing conditions on the players. What do you make of this? Why don't you break down the initial complaint and then what the NFL is thinking with this?
So there were players that played with multiple sets of cleats with different size spikes, and they were still having trouble on the field. So I think it's irresponsible for the NFL to bring it up again because it just brings light back to it. Like even if they didn't directly release this report, there's someone talking about it and someone releasing it to the media. So I think it's irresponsible to bring it up this long after. And for a league that cares about players' safety, they probably should investigate what happened here and ensure that it does not happen in the future. But this is a topic that I hope we never have to talk about again because it brought a bad light, and we were just talking about suspensions before this about bringing bad light to the Shield. The NFL should be suspended for 6 games here for bringing this up. So this is
So
worse than what Kamara did.
So essentially, for people who may not have heard about any of this, The Super Bowl field, the players complained about how much they were sliding around, and they even switched cleats at halftime to hope to get better traction, and it didn't really work very well. So the players were very upset with how the field was. Obviously, Kansas City wasn't as upset because they won, but the losing team complained, and the NFL basically said, "No, it's your fault. You wore the wrong cleats." And they said, "No, we switched them at halftime, so it can't be that." And the NFL just blasted them rather than taking any kind of accountability. And like you said, someone at the NFL should get suspended for 6 games. Ah,
Worse than what
just
Kamara did.
yeah, maybe we'll see. So it's worse than the Deflate Gate, that's for sure.
For sure. So let's
All
move
right.
on to some media things here that are happening on networks. First, there's a new Netflix docuseries on Jerry Jones. Netflix paid $50 million for this 10-part series. How do you feel about this, and will you be watching?
I'm not a Cowboys fan, so you know I won't be watching. But I can see the appeal. The Cowboys have been one of the league's most popular teams. They're popular in multiple countries as well. So it makes sense to do something on the Cowboys. Whether or not doing it on Jerry Jones will have quite the same luster as doing it on the Cowboys in general. I don't know if it will live up to that $50 million price tag, but I'm sure a lot of Cowboys fans will find it interesting, and people that are obsessed with eccentric billionaires who build giant stadiums might find it very entertaining as well.
So I really like the fact that this is not like a reality show; it's a docuseries. So it should document his entire life and career with the Cowboys. So that could be really interesting to see how he purchased them and through the first two Super Bowl wins. And I just think that there's a lot of meat on the bones with Jerry Jones because I feel like he's the lead owner. Like as far as like he's like the spokesperson for the owners. So I think that there's a lot there. I'm just really hoping that Jones doesn't have full control over what's released here, and I don't really have a lot of faith that that's not the case. Because why else would Jones sign unless he could be shined in the best light possible? So Netflix might have to cede control to the Jones family on this here, and we may not get the true story or the authentic story. We might get the Jerry Jones version of the story.
Essentially, what you're saying is the best part, Jerry Jones versus Jimmy Johnson, might be heavily favored on the Jerry Jones side and may not get the full drama that we would love to have.
I mean, if you really want to get viewers and everything like that, you get Jimmy Johnson to be interviewed on this as well, and you get both sides. But I don't know if Jerry Jones would allow it, but I think that's the best television because that will will shed light on some of the controversies that have happened over the years.
I agree. That would be the best part to tune in. If they have it one-sided, it's not going to be as entertaining for folks. But what might be very entertaining is something that we've talked about the last couple episodes is Hard Knocks. The Jets are officially selected to be the Hard Knocks team. You have some things to say about the Jets, how entertaining Hard Knocks could be with the Jets.
Yeah, I think that Aaron Rodgers likes to control his narrative, and it's going to be really hard to control the narrative with the media there all of the time. And we get to watch Aaron learn his new team in the presence of media. So that is probably the A1 storyline that Hard Knocks could have selected. And again, what we are just talking about with Jerry Jones, like not that we're like rooting for drama, but no one's going to sit there and watch a boring TV show where nothing happens. So you pick a team that's most likely to produce a little bit of drama and a little bit of suspense, and that's probably the New York Jets at this point
So essentially, we are rooting for drama.
for TV purposes only, not in our personal lives.
Speaking of drama, the Commander sale went through fully, right? It's done.
We hit a Snyder snag. That's what we're going to call it, a Snyder snag. So basically, there's a legal issue with Schneider that's holding up the sale. Apparently, it's related to the John Gruden leaked emails, which is absolutely insane that that's even like connected to this. And it could delay or scrap the sale altogether, which is ridiculous. So, does Snyder not want to sell because this was like a $6 billion offer that he accepted? I just don't know. I don't know how serious this is, but obviously for the league's sake, I hope that the Snyder reign is over soon. And if you remember correctly, Snyder put in like a 2 or 3 month buffer on contracts that he didn't have to pay because he wanted the new owner to pay them. So this could kind of backfire on Snyder as well, and he might end up having to pay these contracts that he didn't want to pay, and he thought he was being smart by putting the language in there that the new owner would have to pay them. So there's a lot of interesting subplots in here, but hopefully at the end of the day, this Washington team of right now called the Commanders, which we have already discussed that it may not be the Commanders for long because they don't own the trademark to the Commanders. So it's really hard to license and sell merchandise for something that you don't own. And we were really hoping to get a new owner and then a new logo slash team name again.
So it's a whole different Snyder DC beef compared to the movies, right?
Right.
All right. All right. Well, we've got a new football analyst out for college football, and Fox Sports has signed Mark Ingram, former Saints running back, to be their new analyst. What do you make of that?
I really think this spells the end of Mark Ingram's career in the NFL, and he didn't officially retire, which is always like weird to me to like accept a new career without officially retiring first. So it seems like he's leaving a door open for like a late season return or injury, and he'll step out of the booth for X amount of games until and compete and help compete down a playoff stretch. But I think for all intents and purposes that Mark Ingram can be erased from people's fantasy boards and fantasy projections because I just don't see him contributing, and B he may have retired without retiring.
I mean, was he still on your board? He was off mine.
He's off now.
All right. Speaking of trying to take someone off the board, the Rams apparently tried to trade Matthew Stafford in the offseason. Does that surprise you?
So it's not a surprising revelation because of how many veteran contracts that they've shed this offseason. But what is surprising is the fact that it's getting leaked and leaked now. Like, where's the value in it being leaked now? I'm almost thinking that it's coming from a rival GM that heard it from a GM that the Rams were discussing with, and they kind of want to create that discussion and that dissension with the Rams before training camp begins. So that really kind of hurts some of the chemistry that the Rams and Stafford might have. Hopefully he's a pro enough to kind of overcome it mentally. Hopefully he returns to what he was 2 years ago. And if he does, the Rams could be decent this year. I don't think they're going to be a playoff contender or a Super Bowl contender, but they could definitely be decent and give some teams a hard time when it comes to football games. What do you think about Stafford here? And what do you think about the Rams' outlook for this year?
So I've had concerns about Matthew Stafford's arm falling apart. And I think if this is true, then the Rams have the very same concerns, which means that they are kind of down on how they're going to do this year, which is how I feel about the Rams. I think the Rams will probably be close to circling the drain. I don't know if they'll be at the very bottom, but I don't think that they're going to make the playoffs this year. I don't know if they'll get more than 5 or 6 wins this season. And I think that them drafting an electric college quarterback, if not a top prospect, in Stetson Bennett, someone who was on a very good Georgia Bulldogs team, I think they potentially are grooming him as a possible replacement for Stafford, unless, of course, they somehow end up with a top pick and get one of these very highly rated quarterback prospects in the next draft. I think they're anticipating, finishing in the middle of the pack or bottom third, maybe out of range to get one of these quarterbacks. So they're trying to keep the ball rolling with a potential young replacement and try to ride out Stafford, or maybe they leaked it out there. So maybe in the middle of the season they can offload Matthew Stafford if he looks okay at the start, and they're still not getting wins. I don't know, but it doesn't bode well for them outlook wise this season.
We will see. Aren't Stetson Bennett and Matthew Stafford, aren't they the same age?
No, they're not the same age. You jerk. I think they're I think they're still like 9 or 10 years apart, but they did go to the same college. I think they both went to Georgia.
So Stafford's got a 15-year head start on him and only 10 years age difference. So
Yeah, yeah,
kind of an interesting stat right there.
it is. It's a little strange, but it's another quarterback who made some news. Josh Allen. I don't know if you guys remember the Stephon Diggs news where he wanted to make a scene about being upset with the organization and how things ended last season. Josh Allen came out and said, this was just greatly overblown. It's way out of proportion. We like Stephon. So he kind of walked it back down, and Stephon Diggs is back in the building, it seems like. Jeff, do you think that it was just blown out of proportion?
So I do think that the Bills are good now, and I do think winning cures a lot. But I also agree with Diggs and his gripes with the Bills offense because I don't think that Diggs is getting the help or the looks that he should be getting if he had help opposite of him. And he's got Gabe Davis, and I don't think Gabe Davis is taking away coverage or getting looks like let's say DeAndre Hopkins would get there. So I do agree with the wide receiver in this spot, and typically I would look differently at the wide receiver that's complaining about the offense. But just watching the Bills and how the last 3 seasons ended, I completely agree with Diggs that there's something going on with this offense, and it needs to be fixed sooner rather than later. Because they were non-existent, they didn't show up in playoff games, especially against the Bengals.
Yeah, the infamous Gabriel Davis breakout season did not exactly happen. So it would make sense to bring in someone like Hopkins. So we'll see if they make any kind of acquisition before the season starts or if they change anything up. But right now, looks like it's going to be pretty close to the same as last year unless they utilize these two prominent tight ends together. We'll see how that goes.
Absolutely. So we will see.
All right. Well, that does it for our news around the league segment here. So thank you guys for watching or downloading or listening to this episode. And please don't forget to like and subscribe. Please leave us a comment. Every little bit helps with that. So please share this show. Thank you guys.
As always, you can find us with our handle at N2EFantasy on Spotify, YouTube, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and now on Threads. Until next time, take care of yourselves and remember, it's truly never too early for fantasy football. Thank you again.
Bye, everybody.